Hidden amongst the pages of the latest edition of Pravda was a brief obituary. It was dedicated to a 31-year-old woman who had died, quote, suddenly and tragically in the early hours of November the 9th, 1932. On a different page was another letter eulogizing the same young woman, this time with dozens of signatures printed underneath. Although the death must have been significant to warrant a double feature in the Communist Party's official newspaper, most of Pravda's readership would have had no idea who this mysterious Nadya Alliluyeva even was. The Soviet Union had become extremely repressive by 1932. Joseph Stalin had succeeded the Bolshevik Party's founder, Lenin, in 1924, and his harsh agricultural policies were wreaking havoc across the USSR. Forced collectivization saw thousands of private farms, which had been owned by peasants, violently transferred to the state, and all resistance was thoroughly suppressed. Millions of peasants were sent to forced labor camps, and Stalin ordered that wealthy peasant farmers, the kulaks, were to be liquidated as a class. Soviet farmers were forced to sell their surpluses to the state at constantly low prices. But when a series of particularly bad harvests gripped the countryside, state procurement remained disproportionately high, and the Soviet peasantry were left to starve, especially in places like Ukraine and Kazakhstan. It's estimated that between 4.6 and 8.5 million people died from starvation or disease during the famine. But Stalin saw his first decade in control as a complete success. The Soviet Union's heavy industry was developing at a rapid pace, a potentially politically dangerous peasantry had been ruthlessly eliminated, and according to official reports, unemployment simply didn't exist. But just days after the 15th anniversary of Russia's October Revolution, which saw the Bolsheviks take power, Stalin was told that his wife had been discovered face down in a pool of blood. Here is the life of Nadya Alliluyeva, and this is Crown Undone. Nadya Alliluyeva was 2 when her father Sergei befriended the young revolutionary that was supposed to be serving 3 years in Siberian exile. Although Sergei had been born in southwest Russia, he was living in the Caucasus working as an electrician for the local rail depot when he joined the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party in 1898, the year it was founded. 2 years later, the 20-year-old that would later be known as Joseph Stalin would give up on his studies at the Tbilisi Orthodox Seminary to become a professional revolutionary. Stalin had essentially received a classical education without officially qualifying to enter the priesthood, but he would later claim that he was expelled from the seminary because of his revolutionary agitation. Stalin joined the Social Democratic Workers' Party and soon became intimately entangled in the party's Bolshevik faction. Nadya was born in Baku in today's Azerbaijan on the 22nd of September 1901, and at least according to the family myth, 2 years later Stalin saved an infant Nadya after she fell into the water while playing on a nearby embankment. After a brief time living in Moscow, Nadya, her parents, and her 3 older siblings moved to St. Petersburg in 1907. Nadya started studying at the St. Petersburg Gymnasium and soon became a fervent supporter of the Bolshevik Party herself, having been surrounded by revolutionary activities since she was born. A year before the family moved to St. Petersburg, their friend Joseph Stalin married the Georgian seamstress Ekaterina Svanidze. Ekaterina's brother had introduced the two, and by the summer of 1906, the couple decided to get married when Ekaterina found out that she was pregnant. However, since Stalin insisted on using false documents and an alias in the wedding ceremony, finding a priest to marry the young couple proved difficult. Eventually, one of Stalin's old classmates at the seminary agreed to perform the service under the condition that it took place at night. So, at 2 a.m. on the 16th of July 1906, Stalin and Ekaterina were married. But the next year, just months after giving birth to her one and only son Yakov, Ekaterina contracted typhus and died on the 22nd of November 1907, at just 22 years old. It's said that during her funeral, an inconsolable Stalin threw himself onto her grave, and apparently said of his dead wife, quote, "This creature softened my heart of stone. She died, and with her died my last warm feelings for humanity." Despite this alleged devotion to Ekaterina, Stalin was quick to return to Baku without his first son, who was left to be raised by Ekaterina's family. In fact, when Yakov was finally sent to live with his father in Moscow more than a decade later, the pair could not get along. Stalin and Nadya would meet again in St. Petersburg in 1917, and later that same year, the Bolsheviks would take power in Russia. Stalin is put in charge of Bolshevik policymaking and organization, and he's given control of the party's official newspaper Pravda before being appointed People's Commissar for Nationalities. But not long after the Bolshevik takeover, the country descended into civil war. Lenin had agreed to signing an armistice with the Central Powers, withdrawing Russian forces from the First World War and ceding massive portions of territory to Germany, a decision that enraged the left socialist revolutionaries, who soon pulled out of the coalition government. Under a common anti-Bolshevik cause, the left socialist revolutionaries nominally banded together with the pro-Tsarist right to fight against the Bolsheviks' Red Army. At the time, Nadya was still studying at the St. Petersburg Gymnasium, and the 38-year-old Stalin had just returned from his latest stint in Siberian exile. Nadya probably saw Stalin as this glamorous revolutionary who might one day lead communist Russia, and who, despite the age difference, her father approved of wholeheartedly. Stalin became extremely close to the 17-year-old, and the two were officially married early in 1919. Following the government's relocation to Moscow, Stalin and Nadya moved into separate rooms in the Kremlin's amusement palace. Nadya dropped out of the gymnasium she was studying at, and, like many other wives of members of the Politburo, became her husband's secretary. Nadya was often left at home in Moscow while Stalin visited the front. As she got older, she wasn't blatantly revolutionary herself, and she never fought for the revolution like other partners of Bolsheviks often did. The same year that the Russian Civil War officially ended in a Bolshevik victory, Nadya gave birth to her first son, Vasily, on the 21st of March 1921. Later, in 1921, Stalin's first son, Yakov, was sent to live with his father's new family, and although Nadya was only 6 years older than her stepson, the two formed a close bond. At about the same time, the son of one of Stalin's late friends, Fyodor Sergeyev, was also sent to be raised in the Stalin household. Neither Stalin or Nadya were particularly present parents, and after briefly working as a secretary for Lenin, Nadya was allegedly expelled from the Bolshevik Party for struggling to balance her job with household duties and her responsibilities to the party. By 1922, Lenin had become seriously ill. A massive stroke had left the Bolshevik leader partially paralyzed, and he was forced to govern the newly established Soviet Union from his dacha south of Moscow. Stalin was appointed Secretary General of the party's Central Committee, and effectively acted as an intermediary between the sickly Lenin and the government. But a year before his death, Lenin penned a political testament that criticized Stalin and called for his removal as General Secretary. He wrote, quote, "Comrade Stalin, having become Secretary General, has unlimited authority concentrated in his hands, and I am not sure whether he will always be capable of using that authority with sufficient caution." In a postscript to the testament, written several weeks later, Lenin added, quote, "Stalin is too coarse, and this defect, although quite tolerable in our midst and in dealing among us communists, becomes intolerable in a Secretary General. That is why I suggest that the comrades think about a way of removing Stalin from that post and appointing another man in his stead, who in all other respects differs from Comrade Stalin." Stalin knew that Lenin's testament could ruin his career if it were leaked, but a combination of skill and pure luck meant that the document was hidden from the public and key members of the party. Somehow, Stalin was in the clear. When Lenin finally died on the 21st of January 1924, Stalin got to work securing his ascent to power. First, he utilized his political influence to have his main rival, Leon Trotsky, removed from the party, and Trotsky's supporters were soon expelled as well. A series of subsequent strategic alliances saw Stalin's leadership consolidated, though it would take another decade for Stalin's cult of personality and his ruthless dictatorship to take full shape. As Stalin struggled for the top job, Nadya gave birth to her second child and only daughter, Svetlana, on the 28th of February 1926. But Nadya was still not interested in being a particularly present mother, and Stalin was an absent father as well. Instead, Nadya wanted to pursue a professional career. A nanny was hired to take care of the Stalin household, and by 1929, Nadya had enrolled to study at the Moscow Industrial Academy, where she hoped to one day qualify as an industrial manager. Although there's no evidence to suggest that Nadya actively disagreed with any of her husband's policies, her friendships with other students at the academy may have opened her eyes to what was actually going on across the Soviet Union. Nadya and the children would live at their Kremlin apartment on weekdays. On the weekend, they would stay at their dacha on the outskirts of Moscow, and over the summer, the family would often visit Stalin during his regular holidays along the southern Russian coast. Despite this appearance of domestic contentment, most of the time Nadya was miserable. Nadya and Stalin were fighting regularly, and on one occasion, after a particularly bad fight, Nadya took the children to live with her parents in St. Petersburg, but she was convinced to return to Moscow a week later. Nadya reportedly saw a psychiatrist to treat her low moods, and some historians have claimed that Nadya's psychological state may have been affected by gynecological troubles from a series of botched abortions. Either way, as the new decade approached and her husband continued to consolidate his grip on power, Nadya contacted her brother in Berlin and told him to send her a gun. Celebrations to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the October Revolution were well underway on the 7th of November 1932. While Nadya marched alongside her comrades in a parade on Red Square, Stalin and the children watched from atop of Lenin's mausoleum. Nadya was just weeks out from completing her studies at the Industrial Academy. The next night, Nadya and Stalin attended a dinner party for members of the Politburo, and as the alcohol flowed, the two were soon embroiled in another argument, possibly over Stalin's advances towards one of the younger wives in attendance. According to historian Simon Sebag Montefiore, the couple's argument worsened when Stalin toasted to the quote, destruction of the enemies of the state. But when he saw that Nadya wasn't listening, he allegedly threw something at her to get her attention. Enraged, Nadya stormed out of the Kremlin apartment. It's said that the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov's wife, Polina, ran after Nadya in a show of support. The two women agreed that Stalin was completely drunk, and satisfied that Nadya was feeling better, Polina returned to the dinner and Nadya went back to her own apartment. Exactly what happened next will never be known. Nadya's corpse was found the next morning in a pool of blood, a bullet hole through her heart and a small German pistol by her side. All the children were told was that their mother had died suddenly from appendicitis. 9 years later, a 15-year-old Svetlana discovered that her mother had committed suicide while reading a Western magazine to practice her English, and so began a decades-long fascination with the world beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. In fact, in April 1967, Svetlana boarded a plane to New York. The only surviving child of one of history's most notorious dictators, became the Cold War's most famous defector. Svetlana died in Wisconsin on the 22nd of November 2011. Nadya's son Vasily was said to have been profoundly shocked by the death of his mother, and he began to drink excessively at just 13. He struggled with severe alcohol dependency for the rest of his life. Vasily joined the Air Force during the Second World War and died in 1962, 2 days before his 41st birthday, having spent the last few years of his life in prison for criticizing the Soviet administration. Stalin's son with his first wife Ekaterin also faced a tragic end. Having become basically disowned by his father, Jakob was captured by the Germans during the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Stalin explicitly refused a deal to secure his son's release, and in 1943 Jakob died in a German concentration camp after he was electrocuted by the camp's fence when he tried to make an escape. Nadya was buried in the Novodevichy cemetery in Moscow, and Svetlana claimed that Stalin never visited her grave. After the death of his second wife, Stalin's paranoia seemed to increase, and his hold on power became ever more brutal. He died in March 1953 at 74 years old. That was the life of Nadya Alliluyeva, and this was Crown Undone.